Amy Harder from the Wall Street Journal.
So, as you know, a judge in Wyoming is going to rule soon on whether he's going to block the BLM fracking rule. Are you confident that the rule will withstand legal scrutiny, and why are you? And in the course that is blocked, can you talk about what action you'll take then?
Well, let me start with the last question, which is the judge in Wyoming has basically stayed the rule pending us providing additional information. I believe we've provided all the additional information that's been required, and the judge is now assessing that. We have stayed our rule going into effect while that legal action is pending. So that will continue. We're continuing with the old rules. The BLM rules are over 30 years old. I've fracked wells before. I started my career in oil and gas. I understand the process, and the rules that the BLM currently has in place were the rules that were in place when I was in petroleum engineering. I'm 59 years old. There has been a lot of change that's happened in the industry technologically since that time, and yet our regulations have not kept pace. You've got now directional drilling, which we didn't have to any significant degree now. So you can go vertically and then drill horizontally for 2 miles. You've got staged fracking over a very narrow band. You've got far more fluid than was ever used back in the days the rules were created. And you've got a different mix of chemicals that have evolved over time that are used in the process. So BLM's rules modernize our fracking regulations. And you've seen a lot of controversy around fracking, a lot of fear on the part of communities. What communities expect of their regulator, whether it is the federal government or state governments, is that whatever practices are being done in their communities, on their lands, in their states, is something that's not going to damage their health or damage their environment. That's what the American people expect of their regulators at every level. That's what our rules do. So ultimately, I'm confident that our rules, which are common sense, which are based on science, which basically take into account where the industry has gone, will be put into place. Whether it's in their exact same form, whether there are changes. One challenge in Wyoming might have a different challenge in another state. I will also say this, that we have provisions in our rules to take into account state rules that are more stringent than ours. So the BLM rules for fracking are baseline minimum standards on federal lands. If a state has more stringent rules, they will apply. We have a process of aligning those rules, so operators will just have one set of rules that they have to abide by. That will be true in Wyoming, which actually has some provisions, I believe, in their rules that may be stronger than what we've put in place. So we hope to work with states in a constructive way that reassures their citizens that these activities are safe, but also recognizes that 40-year-old rules with modern practices does not make sense. And we will continue to make that case and hope that, that will be heard thoughtfully by the judge and others.
We're going to go to Barney Jobson, but I just want to do a quick follow-up on what you've been saying about fracking. There was I'm not the gentleman from the Associated Press, he's back there, but the AP in June ran an investigation that stated the Bureau of Land Management, quote, was so overwhelmed by the boom in drilling techniques known as hydraulic fracturing or fracking that it's been unable to keep with the inspections of some of the highest priority wells. And they stated in one state, for example, Wyoming, 45% of those high impact wells hadn't been inspected. Are you confident that things have improved since then?
No. In short, we have a Government Accountability Office, I think an Inspector General report also, that criticized the BLM for not inspecting our high-risk wells. And while the BLM has done everything in its power to focus the limited resources it has on the highest risk situations, we are under-resourced. And when you look at what's happened to the BLM budget over the last few years, you will see that we do not have the resources necessary to do the job. I've asked for something very basic, very consistent with what we have offshore, for onshore, which is let's match supply and demand. Let's charge a fee, as we do for permitting and inspecting wells, back to industry. So when there is a boom, as we have seen, particularly unlocked because of hydraulic fracturing in places like North Dakota, the Bakken, the Permian Basin, then those fees come in to support the resources at BLM necessary to process those permits, but also inspect those wells. So let's match those two things together, which we do have the capacity to do offshore. That has not gotten past the committee in Congress. So we have an appropriated budget, which has been declining relative to the workload we have. You have a ramp up of interest, even though current oil prices are dampening that a little bit right now. And we have a major backlog of inspections that people expect us to do on public lands that we are not able to do because we're resource constrained. So that's a quick snapshot, and it makes no sense to not match supply and demand and have industry cover the costs of inspecting these wells and also the cost to process the permits in a timely period of time, and frankly to make investments in things like automating that process that speeds it up, and it requires less work for them as well as less work for us.